This is all of it. I'm Alison Stewart, live from the WNYC studios in Soho. Thank you for spending part of your day with us. I'm really grateful you are here. On today's show, folk legend Joni Mitchell is still going strong, recently performing in LA for Fire Aid, and she performed her hit song Both Sides Now from the album of the same name. That concept album came out 25 years ago. We're going to talk to NPR music critic Ann Powers, author of Traveling on the Path of Joni Mitchell, for our latest installment of Silver Liner Notes. And we'll get into the science of fermentation with the co-founder of NOMA's Fermentation Lab. That's the plan, so let's get this started with the Oscar-nominated film, Conclave. It is time for the next installment of our series, The Big Picture. That's when we speak to Oscar-nominated people who worked behind the camera to make excellent movies in 2024. And today we're talking about Conclave. The Sistine Chapel might seem like an unlikely place for a thriller, but the film makes the election of the next pope as exciting as any spy narrative. Conclave is nominated for the Best Picture at this year's Academy Awards and stars Ralph Fiennes and Isabella Rossellini, who are both up for Oscars in acting categories. Also nominated is the film's editor, Nick Emerson, who helped keep the audiences on their toes. You can stream Conclave now on Peacock, and I'm joined now by Nick Emerson. Hey, Nick.
Hey, how are you? Good to be here.
Glad to have you. From your background, you worked in TV news for many years before transitioning into filmmaking. How did that transition come about?
It was a long process, actually, but I actually started in television news and then ultimately moved from television news into documentary film. And so there was little stepping stones that finally sort of got me to feature films. So yes, documentary film, and I spent a long time doing documentary film, which is an amazing place and field to learn how to tell a story and draw a story out of some material. So I did that for a long time, but I was always interested in, trying to get into films, and I was doing lots of short films, and one of them did quite well. And I was very fortunate that the directors who made that short film ended up being offered a feature film, and they somehow managed to persuade the producers to let me edit it, and that was the start of it.
Is there anything the same about editing news footage versus editing film?
Oh yeah, I mean, in it, the rhythms are different, and the way you might you cut the picture is different, but a narrative point of view, it's similar. It's obviously in news or documentary, there's maybe a shorter arc in terms of the story, but they still have a beginning, middle, and an end, which is, true of feature films. So, it's similar, but, I guess the form is different, but, the narrative side of things is, I learned so much from making documentary films in terms of, narrative storytelling and drama, actually, because you still apply, when you're making a documentary film, it's still got to have dramatic peaks and troughs and so forth. So that's something that I took with me into feature film editing.
Nick, what was the first film you remember really noticing the editing?
I remember when I was 14 years old, I remember seeing Taxi Driver for the first time. And goodness knows why my parents were letting me see Taxi Driver at 14. But I remember watching it and being aware that somebody was in control of the picture, and whether that was a director or an editor, but it was the first time that I sort of understood there was a job behind it. And I can actually pinpoint the specific shot. It was a slow motion shot of Robert De Niro's hand moving across a desk, sort of, when he was explaining something to Sybil Shepherd in the office. And I just remember it was like a lightning bolt. It was so unexpected, and therefore I noticed it and was like, wow, I thought it was so beautiful. And then from then I just started to watch films from that point of view.
I'm speaking with Nick Emerson, the editor of the film Conclave. He is nominated for an Oscar for Best Editing. What was your first thought when you first read the script for Conclave?
My first thought was I really want to do this. I remember thinking, oh my goodness, it was just such a page turner. It was so thrilling, and there was two aspects to it. I remember thinking, oh, I just love getting to see behind the curtain of this process of seeing, this very old and very sacred ritual, getting a peek behind the door, I suppose, and seeing it. And then also, it reminded me when I read it of films that I greatly admire, such as All the President's Men and the Alan Pakula films like The Parallax View. It sort of had that sort of flavor of conspiracy thriller, and I was very excited by that, about the challenges of that, and from an editorial point of view. And when I spoke to Edward when we had a meeting about the film, we shared that love of those films. So it was a great starting point for our collaboration.
Should let people know Edward Berger is the director. Now, you edited in London, but you did visit the set. What did you get from visiting the set?
It's really about just being able to spend time with the director when you visit set. I mean, they're very busy on the shooting days, but I was able to, spend time together on the weekends, looking at the film together. And I'd never worked with him before, so it's always, editing and directing, the relationship between two people. It's a long relationship. You spend a lot of time together. So it was a lot about being able to develop that relationship and start to, understand what his desires for the film were. And yeah, it was great. We just were in Rome for some weekends just to, just so I could show him some pieces that we were working on. Although, yeah, although I was in London editing while he was shooting, I would send him scenes that I would cut. As soon as I would have them ready, I would send them over, a secure video sharing platform that he was able to see, how the scenes were coming together at that early stage.
You said that editing Conclave was very meticulous from the beginning, but also that director Edward Berger was open and adaptable. What's an example of him being open to your suggestions?
Just let me think. Oh yeah, there was one example where, in the beginning we were there's a whole sequence where the cardinals arrive and for the conclave, and scripted, and the way it was shot, they were separate sequences. And there was a dialogue scene, and there was scenes of the nuns preparing the rooms, and then there was scenes of the cardinals smoking and on their iPads and so on, and going through security. And it was like that. And there was a dialogue scene that we thought, well, maybe we could take that out. And then I suggested, well, let's just try and mold all this together, and not really worrying about the time and the chronology of these things. And we just you know make it into a montage of all these things sort of coalescing together. But I mean, that's one example. But he's just, he's very he's so prepared and so interested in the detail. But he just loves editing, and so he believes that part of editing is to explore every opportunity available, because he thinks we spent all this time and money and all these amazing craftspeople and actors spent all day on set, and we have to do it for them, if nothing else, is just to make sure that we have been so you know just examined everything as thoroughly as we can. So he's up for everything, and films, not just in this film and any films, if you don't go down these alleys of trying things out, you have to do it, because even if you try one way and it's not right, it might lead you another way, which is right. So you have to explore.
In electing a new pope, there are so many rituals in this movie, traditions, steps that must be followed. What ritual proved to be the most interesting to edit?
I mean, I think the ballot sequences themselves, when the men are gathered, and I particularly like the first one, the first ballot sequence that we put together. Edward had storyboarded these, so we had a good idea of the structure. But the first voting scene, we we played out very sort of deliberately, quite slowly, that you see every step that takes place. And what that did was it gave us the permission and the ability, when we revisit the voting sequences later on in the film, that we can be more fluid with them and change them around and change the order of shots and make them faster or even slower. And that was we were super aware that we wanted to make these rituals different every time. Although it's the same thing taking place, we wanted to see them in an interesting way each time we visited them. So they were so much fun to edit, and just with those wonderful shots that he shot of all the characters and they're putting needles through paper and all that stuff is such a gift to an editor because it's all very dynamic and you can create wonderful montages with those.
All right. What was the least interesting but necessary sequence, and how did you handle it?
Oh goodness, the least interesting. I don't know. I think everything that needed to be there is there, and if it's not there, if it wasn't interesting, we did try to take it out. We always Edward and I used to always say to one another, we when we were making this was that we don't waste a frame. Every frame has to be there for a reason. So I mean, and they're obviously in the editorial process there are obviously always challenges, and I think we spent a lot of time on the first 20 minutes of the film experimenting with structure and making it longer, making it shorter, because there's a lot of elements that you've got to get going. You've got to set up a world, you've got to set up a main character, you've got to set up an inciting incident, you've got to set up all these other characters and get all these little plot lines developing and starting. So that was that was very satisfying to do. But yeah, we spent a lot of time playing with that to get the right combination of those scenes and sequences.
I'm speaking with Nick Emerson, the editor of the film Conclave. He is nominated for an Oscar for Best Editing. Okay, this is really a thriller, this film. It reminded me, like you said, it reminded me of All the President's Men, the machinations, the behind-the-scenes action. How did you want to pace the story so it does feel like a thriller?
Yeah, I mean, we were super aware of that from the beginning, that we wanted it to have a certain pace to it, because we were aware it's a lot of men talking for a couple of hours, so we really wanted to keep the pace up, and we knew that would just help with the tension and keep people on the edge of their seats. And there was sort of two ways we approached it. One was Edward's approach to shooting it, which was very much in the vein of those political thrillers from the 70s you mentioned, which is being extremely rigorous with the shot composition and holding shots longer and also not revisiting the same shot more than once and creating this very sort of strong architecture. So that the way that his grammar approach to these helped create these really strong scenes that are so they're so tense because they're not cutting in a way. And then also there's just the overall pace that we spent a lot of time, adjusting and looking at. And often the way you do that is it's often about, it's taking out little bits of connective tissue, as I would call them, between scenes that you just arrive from one scene straight into the next. So you're carrying the tension from the previous scene straight into the next scene without letting the air out by seeing somebody get up, leave a room, and go into the next scene. And I've sort of tricked my brain over the years in terms of watching films is how to sort of assess the pace is because you have to watch these films so many times when you're editing them. But I tend to try to look. I call it, you look beyond the cuts. Just try to watch it without looking at the cuts because you've spent so much time perfecting these cuts. But if you try to look beyond that and just look and be aware of the flow of information, the flow of emotion, and the flow of story, if you can watch it from that point of view, you can see where the slack is or where there's points that you can really exploit tension. So it's a whole range of processes that we go through to arrive where we did.
What films did you watch?
I rewatched. I mean, All the President's Men. The Parallax View, Clute. I think what else did I watch? I watched. I'm a great admirer of David Fincher's films.
Yes.
I think he creates tension and creates suspense in a really interesting way. So I watched. I think Zodiac was one I watched, and I think The Social Network. He's got a real ability with pace, and especially there's quite often a lot of dialogue in his films as well. So I was keen to see how he approached those as well.
So much of the movie is about what's going on with Cardinal Lawrence internally. Ray finds he says he doesn't want to be Pope, but kind of keep that going. How did you help make his his interior performance rise to the surface for viewers?
Yeah, I mean, we always knew that when we wanted to tell a story, he was the anchor point. We
Anchor.
wanted to keep it, yeah, we wanted to keep it in his point of view so much, that um so that we see everything through him. And it's, so much of it is about the way that Edward shoots Rafe as well. He has a really he's got such a strong instinct in terms of where to place the camera, so he would place the camera above the back of Rafe's head and not necessarily looking, at his face, and quite often in films, you get access to a character through their eyes, but this was different, but it creates this sort of interesting tension between the camera and the actor, and you can sort of see audiences sort of try to peek around the corner to look into the actor's eyes, because they can't see it. So there's things like that, and just giving access. And then also you've just got one of the great actors in the world, that he is just, Rafe is just, so truthful and so in the moment at any given time that it's just the crisis and the situation that he's in, it's coming out of every pore. You just have to point the camera at him, and look at him, and it's being transmitted. So yeah, we did, I always think when I'm putting a scene together is, I always think about these anchor points in the scene in terms of, definitely somewhere where we need to be. And I just sort of focused in on those. And it was always generally related to, to Rafe and how he was, and Cardinal Lawrence, how he was receiving information, in terms of, because he doesn't have huge amounts of dialogue. It's often just about watching him, receive the information, and the situation that's going on around him. But I mean, I just feel so lucky to have, to be able to work with that, that performance. It's, I've admired his work for years, so it was a great thrill.
Stanley Tucci plays Cardinal Bellini, an American who says that he doesn't want the papacy, but later it seems he does want the papacy. Let's listen to this scene and we can talk about it on the other side. This is
Yeah.
between Bellini and Lawrence as Bellini is arriving for the conclave.
Father Bellini.
Aldo.
Am I the last?
Not quite. How are you?
Oh, well, fairly dreadful. Have you seen the papers? Apparently it's already decided it's to be me.
And I happen to agree with them.
What if I don't want it? No sane man would want the papacy.
Some of our colleagues seem to want it.
What if I know in my heart that I am not worthy?
You are more worthy than any of us.
I'm not.
Well, then tell your supporters not to vote for you, to pass the chalice.
And let it go to him? I could never live with myself.
Tell me about Bellini's arc through this film.
Yeah, well, I mean, that scene in particular, it really highlights Stanley's actual genius, because that is a scene where you're setting up an awful lot of ideas with a lot of, dialogue explaining things, and he just is so natural, and it's so you just understand everything that he's feeling, So yeah, I mean, he starts as somebody who's, I think is, has a strong sense of what he thinks is right and what is wrong in the world, and really wants to do something about it, but you know is worried that he doesn't have, he doesn't really want, the top job or the pressure of it. But and then slowly through the film, he basically realizes that he has to do it, and he has to do it to keep his liberal agenda at the forefront, but then gets sort of sucked into the politics of it, and the politicking, and but eventually, through the course of the film, realizes that the ambition of it
Yeah.
has got to him, and there's a lovely scene at the end, actually towards the end, where he goes to Lawrence and apologizes to him for doubting him so much, and it's a really poignant sort of scene between these two brothers, and it actually has one of my favorite cuts in the film, which is just at the end of that scene when they've comforted one another and sort of, bonded. And Stanley's character is asked, Lawrence what his papal name would be, and just at the end of the scene, we cut to this top shot in the Sistine Chapel of Lawrence with the blank ballot, and here it is. Here's the choice. Is he going to vote for himself or not? And it's just it's a wonderful moment. There seems to be so much about the film that's contained in that one moment.
In the background of all of this is the labor of the nuns who are caring for these cardinals. How did you want to make sure that these women didn't fade into the background? In fact, that they were definitely going to be present as the movie went on.
Absolutely. And, it was something Edward and I spoke about when we were editing the film, was just about that presence and how we place it throughout the film, and that, it's there. And, it's also in terms of Isabella's character, we were, Edward was sure to, when, there's scenes that, she is there in the script, that he always made sure to shoot, a big close up of her, so that, she wasn't just somebody, in charge of the nuns, who are preparing all the food and making the beds, that she's there. She's got real strong presence. And, and I think sort of in the film, a little bit of mystery as well. You're not quite sure how she feels about things. You get a little hint of it when she smiles in the canteen when Cardinal Benitez thanks the women for their for all the work that they're doing. So we were just careful that it just had to be placed. And actually, what I always think about these things is, I look at the scene where she does speak, and you sort of at the end where she reveals to the gathered cardinals about Cardinal Tremblay, is I sort of work back from that. That's the point where she speaks and has sort of is prepared to speak. So you just work back from that, really, when you're looking at the overall structure and thinking. And quite often when you go through films, you do track these things. When you let's do a pass thinking about Sister Agnes and where she appears, and we'd look at the timeline of the film and see where she appears, and so it's a calibration, really. But what a wonderful performance! She's amazing.
Nick, where were you when you heard you had been nominated for an Oscar?
I was in the editing room. I was in London in the cutting room. I'm editing Edward's next film at the minute. So I was there, and it was about lunchtime, and I was there with my assistant editor, and we watched the live stream. And yeah, I mean, what an incredible afternoon that was.
And what's the next film?
The next film is called The Ballad of a Small Player, and it stars Colin Farrell, Fala Chen, and Tilda Swinton.
Oh my gosh, not too shabby a group, I'd say.
Yes, wonderful, wonderful. Yes, very excited.
I've been speaking with Nick Emerson, the editor of the film Conclave. He is nominated for an Oscar for Best Editing. Thank you so much, Nick. We appreciate your time.
A real pleasure. Thanks for having me.